What is the best career? Come on, guys. I mean, this is an easy question. We all know that it's North Korea. Hi guys, in this video, as part of my 2,000 subscriber special, I will be answering all of your questions about the channel, my life and politics, from, a new Cold War with China, to the rise of right-wing extremism in Europe, to third parties in America. Also, thank you to everyone for getting me to 2,000 subscribers. I honestly never thought I would get here. Anyway, let's get into it. Alright, so the first question is from Yukio, and Yukio is asking, what is the political impact of coronavirus on liberalism? And here he means economic liberalism, and I guess globalization is included in that. And so basically, I would say that coronavirus is sort of the first time in about 40 years that there is any kind of hurdle or any kind of break on globalization and the liberalization of the economy sort of worldwide. And I think a lot of countries have sort of taken lessons from this, that it may be a good idea to outsource t-shirts to another country. It's not a good idea to outsource your medical equipment. And so I think there's going to be some kind of slowdown in the level of globalization and outsourcing of production, of at least for some kinds of products, things like medical equipment and so on and so forth. And I also think that basically there'll be less worldwide, less global trade, but there will be more regional trade. So I think for instance, the European Union, you will see more trade happening. You see the European countries are already opening up with each other. And I think you'll see this all over the world, sort of regional trade blocks, increasing trade within the bloc, but not so much, outside of it. All right, so the next question is from Sire Jallo, and he asks, what do you think about the rise of right-wing extremism in Europe, and where do you think it will lead to? Well, so this is a very interesting question, basically, because as far as Western Europe goes, at least, right-wing extremism has actually gone, or it depends what you mean by right-wing extremism, but if you're talking about sort of right-wing populist leaders, like Marine Le Pen or Geert Wilders or these kind of people, I would say that their popularity has decreased actually as a result of the coronavirus. Everywhere in the world, sort of the incumbent government, the governing party has massively increased in popularity, whereas the populist parties, their main shtick is, immigration. And in this crisis right now, there's really not that much immigration happening. And so these parties are kind of having a very hard time, responding to the crisis and finding a way to spin this for them politically. So some of them have gone, insanely one way, saying, we should do a hard lockdown like China. Other ones are sort of peddling semi-conspiracy theories, saying, the government is suppressing our freedom by putting quarantine coronavirus measures. They don't really know how to respond to it. But I can tell you one thing is that they are definitely not going away. I think in 6 months, a year's time, maybe 1.5 years' time, these parties will be back. Immigration will once again be a top issue. The EU is already going to be an issue very soon because, of course, the richer countries are being expected to pay for the poorer countries in the form of sort of the Euro bonds. And so, as far as right-wing extremism goes, or the rise of right-wing populism at least, that's stalled for now, but it's definitely going to increase in the future. Alright, so this is a Patreon exclusive question from Eisenskjold, and she's asking, you have quite a focus on authoritarianism and how it subverts democracies. Why? Yeah, you're definitely right about that, Eisenskjold. I've got a lot of videos, about Poland, Hungary, the Philippines, Brazil, all about sort of the rise of authoritarian, often populist leaders. And basically the reason for that, this really is a global trend worldwide, something called that, in political science they call illiberal democracy. It's basically the idea of having sort of a popularly elected leader who sort of gets their legitimacy from claiming to be sort of the representative of the people against the establishment. But in reality, what they use that sort of populist message, they use it to sort of undermine the institutions and checks and balances of liberal democracy. So liberal democracy is basically, consisting of the democracy part, which is, free elections and that, the will of the people, but also liberalism, which means, protection for minority rights, free media, checks and balances, etc. And they're mainly focusing essentially on the democracy part, but not so much on the liberalism part. And basically that in a way is a threat to democracy, and you see this sort of all over the world. And for me, that's a concerning issue, because I very much believe in sort of the ideal of liberal democracy, of a country where, yes, the people have power and there's majority rule, but there is also protection against, you know, tyranny of the majority, against checks and balances and individual rights. All right, Pretzel Earth Society asks, views on the future of the EU. I could talk about that for a very long time, which is why I'm going to do a video on that, I think, next week, about essentially the future of the EU and the current situation with the sort of EU coronavirus package. Ryan asks, what part of the world are you in? I am right here in the Netherlands. It's actually in the channel description as well. All right, and then we've got another Patreon exclusive question from Ghost Virus, and he basically has a long question about sort of the possibility of a new Cold War with China. And this ties into another question from another guy, from Adam Driver, who asks, what do you think China's endgame is in terms of their recent policies and actions that make them appear as if they want the rest of the world to dislike them? And so basically, the way I see it, the combination of the pandemic and Trump's presidency will prove pivotal in accelerating the rise of China. By destroying America's soft power and sowing discontent among its allies, as well as showing how vulnerable and incompetent America really is during the pandemic, Trump has helped to expose America to China, and the world will look less to America for leadership than in the past, and that will be seen as a threat. At the same time, the pandemic is facilitating the decoupling of China and America. Suddenly, dependence on China and trade with China is seen as less beneficial, and it doesn't seem like such a good idea to produce your medical equipment in China. And with an increasingly isolationist attitude on both the left and the right in America, there will be less appetite for foreign adventures. And so with less economic interdependence, it becomes easier to fuel a Cold War-style rivalry. China is making its bid to be a superpower, and America knows it. So with regards to a Cold War, we've already started. So Eric Krause asks, what is the best Korea? Come on, guys. I mean, this is an easy question. We all know that it's North Korea. All right, Eric Krause has another question. Do you play video games? If so, which ones? And what do you think of American third parties? So basically, yes, I do play video games, mainly sort of either shooters or strategy games. So it could be anything from sort of, you know, Age of Empires, Dawn of War, to, you know, Star Wars Battlefront 2 and the Knights of the Old Republic. And as for third parties, there's another guy, Perfectly Purple, who also asks about, do you think a third party could find major success in our lifetime? I suppose he's referring to America, of course. And the simple answer to that is no. 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 And the reason for that is something called Duverger's law, and basically what that is, it's the law that says that if you have a political system where there's first past the post and sort of a single representative from each district, and basically so how the math of that works out is that if you vote for a political party that is not one of the two major parties that has a chance of winning, you're basically giving votes to the other side. Essentially, in a first past the post system, you will always have a two-party system, unless you have something like a regional party, like the Bloc Québécois you have in Canada, but that's not really the case in America. And also the history shows that the most successful third party in America ever, the Bull Moose Party from Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. Yeah, and basically what happened was totally predictable. The Republican vote was split exactly in half. They won 25% for the Republicans, 25% for the Bull Moose Party, whereas the Democrats, who only won 40-something%, ended up winning the election. And that's exactly what would happen in America. The only way, if you have a political view that's outside of the two mainstream parties, you know, maybe you're very left, very right, the only way is basically to take over one of the major parties. A third party, really, I'm sorry to say, but it's mathematically impossible for them to win. And then we've got another Patreon exclusive question from Linda Gerten, and she asks, if you could change something in the American voting system, what would you focus on? And this basically relates to the previous question. It's very simple. If I was in charge of the American system, I would abolish the Electoral College, and I would introduce proportional representation. And Electoral College, I mean, I think we don't need to explain that one. I think it's ridiculous that the minority should get to choose who the president is. And proportional representation is basically what they have in most European countries, where the percentage that each party gets, that's exactly the percentage they get in the Congress. and that would make a lot more sense. And in that case, a third party actually would be viable. In fact, they wouldn't be just a third party, there would be a third, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth party. And it would also make sure that sort of the main parties, the Democrats and Republicans, would be held much more accountable. Now, you kind of have a choice only between two parties, and it's very easy for them to say, well, vote for us because the other guys are worse. And that's much more difficult in a multi-party system. Nicolas Bednar asks, will you make any videos talking about African politics? And yes, the answer is yes. I have made a video talking about African politics, about the ethnic tensions that are currently destabilizing Ethiopia, so check out that video. Nicholas asks, will you ever do a video on Canadian politics? And he's talking here about some of the conservative leaders who might face Justin Trudeau in the next election. And the answer to that is, I probably will, but closer to the time of the election. Now it's not that hot of a topic, but closer to the election, it's definitely a topic I'll consider doing. And then we've got a question from Joseph, and he's asking about the role of Iran in the Libyan civil war. Iran has come out on the side of the GNA, which is the UN-recognized government in Iran. And so basically, the situation with Iran's involvement in Libya is too complicated to answer here, so I left you an interesting article in the description. But basically, the article gives an alternative view. You see, most of the media suggests that Iran supports the GNA because the GNA is fighting against General Haftar, who is supported by the Saudis, Iran's rival. But this article suggests, in fact, that General Haftar has received a lot of weapons of Iranian origin, and that Iran until now has covertly supported General Haftar, not the GNA. And the reason for this is that it's a way of getting back at Turkey for their invasion of Syria, and because some Syrian forces are being sent to Libya. Obviously, Assad can't afford to lose any men, and so Iran is reinforcing him back at home, thereby gaining more influence in Syria compared to Russia. Finally, yes, Haftar is supported by the Saudis, but by helping him, the Iranians could get the Saudis and other Gulf states to recognize the legitimacy of President Assad now that most of the rebellion is over. Anyway, check out that article for more details. And then we've got Efrain Torres, who asks my opinion on socialism. So basically, I have my political compass test where I kind of get into detail about my political positions. But to answer your question, basically, it's kind of mixed. I think there are quite a few good points made by socialism, and many that are also relevant today. For instance, if you talk about, automation, the reason automation in a capitalist system is a threat is because, the capital and the robots and the AI is owned by capitalists and not really by workers, whereas, of course, the idea of socialism is that automation is not at all a threat because people are not going to lose their jobs because they are the ones who control the robots in the first place, and so they will end up doing less work. And so in these kind of things, socialism does give a lot of sort of interesting critiques, but generally I would not consider myself who wants to totally abolish the economic system presently, but I do believe in sort of having strong social safety nets, as well as some aspects of socialism, for instance, worker cooperatives, which have been proven to work. For instance, in the Basque country in Spain, there are actually a number of very successful worker-owned cooperatives called the Mondragon Corporation. And basically, those are voluntary cooperatives formed by the workers themselves. It's not something that comes top-down from the state, Soviet Union style. So that kind of thing is something I'm definitely open to. Alright, so these were some great questions. There's another announcement as well, guys. So basically, my channel has now been monetized by YouTube, which is, great news. The only problem is that about half of my videos have been demonetized. So if any of you guys are interested in supporting the channel on Patreon, I will leave the link below. And of course, thank you again to my Patreons for making this video possible. Like, share, and subscribe. Because this was my take.